I mentioned that the VPSA meeting was coming up, and that might be a forum for Naomi to speak. So I invited her, and Lily graciously gave her some time on the agenda.
All right. Well, thank you, Melissa and Naomi. I'm recording just so we can share the presentation with others on our campuses if that's helpful.
Right. Well, thank you, Lily and Melissa, just for taking the time. I know there's a lot going on right now impacting your institutions. And so appreciate you prioritizing this topic of how do we engage constructively across difference. And I think that events of the last week have certainly reinforced the need for this, that we need to be giving young people tools and skills to be able to talk to each other even when they disagree. And I think, you know, political violence and the rise of political violence is only going to become worse if we don't address this upfront and proactively, to provide a different framework for students, for how to engage. So what I want to do is I want to walk you through some slides, a little bit of an overview of what we do at CDI, and then open it up for questions and discussions, and to sort of get a sense of folks' interest in this work. But I think we all know that over the past decade, free expression and civil discourse have been hotly contested on college campuses. And you can see with some of these national polls here that students are feeling less comfortable speaking openly, and faculty are also self-censoring at unprecedented rates. And I think this lack, or maybe the perceived lack in some cases, of free expression and open inquiry and dialogue really undermines the core mission of higher education, right? It negatively impacts student learning, relationships, and the student experience. And I think that on top of these national trends, certain states, including Kentucky, have also faced state legislation around limiting DEI work. And I think that this has been used as a tool to build connection, community, and understanding, and it's now no longer available in quite that same way. And I think what we're seeing is really a lack of trust in public higher education. But I think that there is a bright spot, and that's that students want to engage constructively across their differences. And I think this is one of the really hopeful signals we see. The demand is there. The question just becomes how are institutions going to support this interest and this need. And I think in Kentucky, you're already ahead of the curve. You know, I took a look at the Kentucky graduate profile, the learning framework, right, where you've identified 10 skills that you want all of your graduates to come away with to prepare them for the workforce. And I think at least 5, if not more, of these skills that you've identified are related to constructive dialogue. So the obvious one around civic engagement, but also communication skills, interpersonal skills, collaboration, and teamwork, right? These are all things that are essential for students to succeed in the workforce. These are durable skills that we can't just expect students to have, that we actually need to teach them, and they want to learn them. And I think especially sort of this post-COVID generation is lacking sort of the basics in a lot of these, that we have a role now. Higher ed has a role to teach them. So I'll tell you a little bit about Constructive Dialogue Institute, who we are. So we were founded in the aftermath of the 2016 presidential election by our current executive director, Caroline Mell, as well as psychologist Jonathan Haidt, who some of you may have heard from for his current work around the anxious generation. Before that, he wrote a book called The Righteous Mind. And this is really his research in that book is really the basis for our educational programs. So Jonathan and Caroline were deeply concerned about rising polarization, and about the fact that as a society, we had lost the ability to communicate our cross divides. And so what they did is they founded CDI to take the lessons from behavioral science research and translate them into practical tools that can be used to teach the skills to help us navigate our differences more effectively. So we are nonpartisan, we're a nonprofit, and we really focus on helping institutions of higher ed transform their campuses into learning environments that support dialogue across differences. Many campuses already have small initiatives around dialogue, and those are wonderful bright spots. But the real opportunity and where we really focus at CDI is around scaling this work beyond those pockets. And this is based on research out of University of Pennsylvania, that culture shifts start to happen when you reach 25% of a community. And so our goal is to help universities reach 25% of their population to help shift culture around dialogue, to create a tipping point that creates lasting change, right? So this is both a skill as well as a culture opportunity, right? Students need the skills to feel comfortable and confident engaging in dialogue about sensitive topics. Faculty and staff need those skills to create environments that encourage intellectual diversity. They need to be able to facilitate these conversations and intervene when they get tense, right? Because they are experts in the subject they taught. They learned, they did their PhD in, but they're not necessarily experts in dialogue. And more broadly, we want campuses to create a set of norms that encourage people to speak freely, even if their views go against the consensus. And when campuses establish those norms for dialogue through skill building at every level of the organization, people can feel more confident speaking up, communicating across lines of difference, and they can address conflict early before it spirals, right? So dialogue infrastructure shouldn't be about responding to a crisis. It's really a foundation for resilience, for trust, for building a healthier learning environment in which all of our students can thrive. And so we help campuses reach that cultural tipping point by providing engaging, evidence-based, practical, and scalable tools. So our programs are engaging so students participate meaningfully. They're gaining practical tools. They are evidence-based. Our outcomes are measurable, and they're scalable so that they can be embedded across the institution. So it's really about building capacity that we want to help you to do. So what does this actually look like in terms of the substance of what we're doing? We take this abstract idea of how do we have better dialogue, and we translate it into 5 practical principles. These principles are grounded in behavioral science research that anyone can use, and they're good for all types of contexts. So yes, they help talk about polarizing political issues, but they also help with roommate conflicts, right? They also help with group class team projects where students need to learn how to work together. They're going to prepare them for the workforce where they're going to have to work with all different kinds of people. So these 5 principles are to let go of winning, right? To engage with curiosity instead of trying to debate or win, to ask questions out of curiosity that open up the door for learning, to share stories. We know from behavioral science research that stories engage people, a different part of our brain than facts and figures. And so how can we use stories to build empathy? How can we respond during moments of attention instead of react? Because the goal of constructive dialogue is not to gloss over our differences, but actually to engage in them. So how can we do that thoughtfully? And ultimately, how can we find what's shared, right? How can we find some common ground? Because our ultimate goal is that we need to live, learn, and work together. And so we're really trying to open up the door for curiosity, connection, collaboration, and to be able to do this at scale. All of our work is research-based, so we've conducted randomized control trials to measure the efficacy of our programming. So this is just one graph of students who went through our online learning program perspectives. And you can see that before the start of the program, their levels of polarization were the same, similar to the national averages. And after completing our program, their levels of polarization declined to the same levels as what we were seeing in 1994. And we have 6 different measures that we track through pre and post survey measurements. And so we're able to provide that outcome data through our programming. We started working exclusively with faculty in the classroom. In the last 3 years, we've shifted to an institutional approach that we saw that there was opportunity if we wanted these learnings, these skills to stick. we needed to focus on that culture change. And so this is really what we're doing today. We've had 170,000 learners go through our program with very high rates of recommendation, and are really now looking through this conversation and others to increase our impact through statewide partnerships. And I'll share just a little bit of a hands-on practical example of our work with one university system, the City University of New York. We've been working with them for the past year and are engaging in a 5-year partnership across all 26 of their institutions, working with everyone from senior administrators, presidents, chancellors, cabinet members, all the way down to students. We expect that over the next several years, we're going to be training 50,000 students, 500 faculty, 250 staff, over 100 senior administrators. The senior administrator work has actually already started to really think about this on a holistic level. We also work with the State Council of Higher Education in Virginia. This is a third year of our partnership. We've reached over 18,000 students, although this doesn't include the students who are currently enrolled in the program that has just launched at the start of this school year. So that number will go up pretty soon. But we've worked across 14 of their campuses. And we see really positive outcomes from their learners in terms of both satisfaction, but also saying that they're gaining practical skills. And we see this across the board, that our programming builds confidence, helps students navigate tough conversations, and really builds durable skills that are applicable across both their personal life, their school life, and into their professional life as well. So that's sort of a general overview. I want to pause if there's questions at this point before I jump into some of the specifics of the programs and what this opportunity could look like across Kentucky. And speak up, because I can't necessarily see your hand if you're raising it. Okay. If there are no questions, I'll keep going and I'll pause again at the end to open it up for questions. But what I want to do is just sort of talk about some of the specific programs we offer, which, working with Melissa and Lily and the Council on Post-Secondary Ed, we have this opportunity through a funder to help subsidize these programs to bring them to schools across the state. And I think our goal, and part of our goal in today's conversation, is to assess interest and capacity for this kind of work. So let me describe the programs in a little more detail. This slide is really just to show that we engage across all levels of the university: students, student leaders, faculty and staff, as well as that leadership. And again, on this theory that we need to reach 25% of a community across all levels to begin to create that culture shift and shift those norms. Our core flagship offering that you've heard me mention before is called Perspectives. It is a blended learning program that really brings together the psychological concepts, behavioral science research, into very practical and interactive scenarios to help people engage across difference. So there are 6 online lessons. They're about 25 minutes each. And then those lessons are conducted asynchronously online. And then there's opportunity for students to come together and actually practice those skills through peer-to-peer conversations. There's a dashboard to track learners' progress. And then what you'll also receive, is implementation support to help you with the rollout, as well as data and analytics to show impact. Schools implement the Perspectives program in a variety of different ways, in both curricular and co-curricular spaces, as Melissa was saying. So through orientation programs, first-year experience courses, gen ed courses. One of our most common pathways is to bring this to student leaders, whether those be heads of student clubs, student government, resident advisors, transition leaders, or upperclassmen mentors that are helping first-year students. Residential life This is a great sort of community building activity for a floor of a residence hall. And we also have a staff and faculty version. So to bring these skills to staff as well. Many people, when I describe this to them, they go, "That's great, but I don't have time." We are overloaded with work, and we understand that, which is why we provide implementation support. Don't worry about the details of this slide. It's all to say we guide you step by step through this process to help make the most of the tools, to think through how to communicate the value of the initiative, to plan your rollout, to configure the learning platform, again, to make this something that doesn't take you away from other priorities. And then I also mentioned we do this data and analytics. So we are able to show both individual impact around measures like intellectual humility and perspective taking, and also cultural impact around measures like belonging and free expression. So that program is really about the base of the pyramid I showed you. How do we bring these tools to engage across difference at scale? But what we've realized is that it's not enough to just give students these skills. We need to create environments in which they can use these skills. And that's where our live workshops come in. So we have 2 live programs that I want to highlight. One is Foundations in Constructive Dialogue. You can think of this as a Dialogue 101, and it equips participants with a set of out-of-the-box strategies to bring a dialogue framework into their classrooms and into co-curricular settings. We have 2 versions of the program, one for faculty and staff, one for student leaders. And then we also have a more intensive certification program. So this is a 20-hour program for staff or faculty, 14 hours for student leaders, where participants actually come away with that certification to be able to facilitate dialogue on difficult topics, whether that be in a structured setting or a more informal setting, but it really sort of takes those skills a level deeper to really be able to engage in those difficult topics. So what I'd love to do is just open this up for conversation, questions. Where do you see a need for this work on your campus? What is the appetite to take on any kind of new projects in the current environment?
Thank you for sharing that, Naomi. Does anybody have questions or thoughts on capacity or interest, or is this a need on our campuses? Do we have other initiatives already rolling out that are kind of fulfilling this need? I feel like over the summer, there was a lot of just uncertainty or questions about HB4 and how we were going to kind of pivot and adapt our programming, our language embedded throughout our programming. And I think ultimately with the goal of still building belonging and constructive dialogue on campus, through the initiatives that maybe now need to be adjusted a little bit because of an HB4 legislation. So I'm just curious how the fall has rolled out and what each of our campuses have maybe done that kind of move us in that direction.
Well, I think in our case, we're just trying to feel our way through this and get us a sense of what House Bill 4 will allow you to do and not to do. And there's a lot of questions about that. So there's just a lot of uncertainty.
And I will say that we work in both blue states and red states with anti-DEI legislation. In fact, I'll just give you one example. At Georgia Tech, they're using this to meet a system-wide mandate around free expression. And I know that there was some language around intellectual diversity and fostering free expression on campus in HB4. And so I think this could also, because we're nonpartisan, I think it can be used as a tool that can achieve many of those goals.
Well, there's definitely a need for the ability to have civil discussions, and there's no question about that, and have differing viewpoints and still be able to discuss them without it becoming so polarized. So,
And I think the core thing is like students don't naturally know how to do this, and they don't see it modeled in our society very much. And so I think that we as institutions of higher ed, as education in general, we need to actually be thoughtful about how we're teaching these skills, because I don't think they come naturally to our students.
Melissa, or Naomi, are you presenting at the provost, the CAAO meeting next Friday?
Correct.
Okay. Because that might be a good opportunity once your provosts have also had a chance to kind of hear the presentation and consider current initiatives or current efforts underway on campus. And then if there still would be a interest or a need for this kind of opportunity, we can continue to bring more folks together or to learn more.
And I'll highlight that I think this program doesn't look the same on any two campuses. So our implementation team really works with you to think through what are your goals, who are the audiences you want to reach, what are the most effective ways to do that. And we can work with you. A lot of schools will start out with a smaller group to get feedback, to start to get that buy-in, and then scale from there. And so just thinking about all of those different options, it doesn't need to be a one size fits all. So we'll really work with you to be responsive to what you're looking for.
Okay.
And maybe our next steps, Lily, is just to find out, on a scale of 1 to 10, how big of an issue is this on our campuses? And number 2, is this, is there a need and something that our campuses want to pursue? And maybe we are, maybe we're already addressing that in other ways. So maybe it's more of a landscape analysis for us, but this was an opportunity. This group only meets a few times a year, and this was upcoming, and it was a good opportunity, but it was,
and I
just
think
kind of
some
throwing
states,
that out there.
yeah, and some states most have started at exactly that point. We're in conversation with Georgia right now. Sorry, not Georgia, North Carolina. And they're actually starting with exactly that, which is a landscape analysis and asset mapping process to sort of say, what are we currently doing? Where are there gaps? And so we have, in addition to our 5 principles of constructive dialogue, we have 5 pillars for dialogue culture. And so we can help you assess sort of where are you currently strong on those 5 pillars, where is there opportunity for growth, and for some institutions, that's a better place to start before jumping into an initiative to roll out programming, to actually say, where are we? So that's certainly an option as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Naomi. All right. Well, I think that I'll go ahead and wrap us up and give folks back some time. I'll send a follow-up email that will include the slides from Naomi's presentation, as well as the recording of the presentation and some other tidbits for everybody. But thank you all for your time today. Have a great
Thank
rest of the
you.
semester. I'll see you in March, I guess, if not before then.